The silence in our dining room cost $400 a bottle. It was a vintage Cabernet, opened and allowed to breathe for exactly 45 minutes, sitting beside two crystal glasses that caught the flicker of the tapered candles. Everything was perfect. The roast duck was crisp, the lighting was dim, and the woman sitting across from me looked breathtaking in the emerald dress I had bought her 3 years ago. Elena smiled, swirling the wine in her glass. To anyone looking through the window of our suburban New York home, we were the poster couple for marital success. 10 years. A decade of building a life, a portfolio, and a reputation. "You've been so quiet tonight, Mark," Elena said, her voice soft, carrying that practiced warmth she used on her clients. She reached across the mahogany table, her fingers grazing the back of my hand. "Are you thinking about the trip?" "I told you, Paris in the fall is going to be magical." I looked at her hand. The diamond on her ring finger caught the candlelight. I didn't pull away. Not yet. "I'm thinking about timing, Elle," I said, picking up my glass. "How timing is everything in life." She tilted her head, confused, but keeping that smile plastered on. "You sound like you're in a board meeting." "Relax, honey. It's our anniversary." I checked my watch. 7:59 p.m. "Yes," I said, "it is." Under the table, my leg bounced rhythmically, a nervous tic I had suppressed all evening. I had spent 6 weeks planning this night. 6 weeks of biting my tongue when she came home smelling of showers taken at the gym she didn't go to. 6 weeks of smiling at Julian, my business partner and mentor, knowing he had his hands on my wife. The plan was cruel, I knew that, but the betrayal had been absolute. I needed the ending to be definitive. The digital clock on the microwave behind her clicked to 8 p.m. On the sideboard, my phone began to buzz. It was the standard vibration, harsh against the wood. Simultaneously, a soft, melodic chime drifted from Elena's purse, which she had placed on the chair next to her. She froze. We had a rule: no phones during dinner, especially not anniversary dinner. "That's odd," she said, laughing nervously. "Who would be calling us both?" "You should answer it," I said, my voice steady. "I'll just let it go to voicemail," she said, reaching for her wine again, but her eyes darted toward her purse. "No, Elena, I think you really need to answer that." My phone continued to buzz. It was my attorney, confirming the filing was active. Her phone continued to chime. I knew who it was. I had orchestrated it. I had sent a text to Julian from a burner number 5 minutes ago, telling him Mark knows, call me now, emergency. She saw the look in my eyes. The warmth was gone, replaced by a flat, dead calm. Her hand trembled as she reached into her bag. She pulled out her phone, not her primary iPhone, but the older model she claimed she kept for work backups. She looked at the screen, her face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of gray. She stammered. "Answer it," I commanded. It wasn't a shout. It was an order given by a man who had nothing left to lose. She slid her thumb across the screen and brought it to her ear, her eyes locked on mine. "Hello?" she whispered. I didn't wait for her to hear Julian's panicked voice. I reached under my chair and pulled out the thick manila envelope I had taped there an hour before dinner. I placed it on the table and slid it across the polished wood. It stopped right next to her wine glass. The bold black letters from the law firm were impossible to miss. "Happy anniversary," I said. Elena dropped the phone. It clattered onto the china plate, cracking the screen. I could hear a tinny voice shouting from the device, Julian's voice. "Mark?" she gasped, looking from the phone to the envelope. "What is this?" "Those are the only papers you need to read tonight," I said, standing up. I picked up my wine glass and finished it in one swallow. The rich taste turned sour in my mouth. "I'm not going to Paris, Elena, and neither are you." "Mark, wait, please, let me explain." She stood up, knocking her chair back. The elegance of the evening shattered instantly. "It's not what you think. Who told you? Is this a joke? The house is in your name for the next 30 days while we sort out the preliminary hearing," I said, walking toward the hallway where my packed suitcase was already waiting by the door. I've already canceled the joint credit cards as of an hour ago. You might want to ask Julian to cover the retainer for your lawyer. He owes you that much." "Mark, stop!" she screamed, the sound tearing through the quiet house. She grabbed the envelope, clutching it like a shield. "You can't just leave. 10 years, Mark. You can't just walk out because of one mistake." I stopped with my hand on the doorknob. I didn't turn around. I couldn't look at her. If I looked at her, I might scream or cry or break something, and I needed to be steel. "One mistake is a typo, Elena," I said to the door. "An affair with my partner is a campaign. Enjoy your dinner." I opened the door and walked out into the cool night air. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, sealing the tomb of our marriage. I walked to my car, got in, and only then, as I gripped the steering wheel, did I allow my hands to start shaking. I sat in the driveway, the engine of my SUV idling with a low, steady hum that vibrated through the steering wheel and into my palms. My hands were still shaking, a physiological betrayal of the calm facade I had just displayed inside. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of leather and the lingering trace of my own cologne, trying to ground myself. I reached for the gear shift, ready to back out and leave the wreckage of my life behind, but a frantic pounding on the driver's side window stopped me. It was Elena. She had run out of the house without her shoes, her emerald dress looking dark and ominous in the pale wash of the security motion sensor lights. Her mascara was already smudged, transforming her perfectly curated face into a mask of panic. "Mark, open the door! You cannot do this!" she screamed, her voice muffled by the safety glass. I didn't want to engage. I had said my piece. But the desperation in her eyes triggered something in me. A morbid curiosity, perhaps, or a need to see the lie fully decompose before I buried it. I rolled the window down 3 inches. The night air rushed in, cold and biting. "Go inside, Elena," I said, not looking at her, staring straight ahead at the garage door. "You're barefoot." "I don't care about my feet," she shrieked, clutching the top of the window frame. "You're acting crazy. You're throwing away 10 years over a phone call? That was just a prank. It was spam. You're letting your paranoia ruin us." I slowly turned my head to look at her. This was the first phase, gaslighting. She was trying to make me question my own reality, a tactic she had used subtly for years. It was almost impressive how quickly she deployed it. "A prank," I repeated, my voice flat. "So, Julian calling a burner phone that I found taped under the sink in the guest bathroom is a prank." She froze, her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I didn't just find the phone, Elle," I continued, my voice gaining a harder edge. "I unlocked it. The passcode was your birthday, not mine, yours. Narcissism really is a fatal flaw. Mark, listen." Her tone shifted instantly from aggressive to pleading. "It was just emotional. We were just talking. He was going through a hard time with the merger, and I was just being a friend. It never got physical. I swear on my mother's life, it never got physical." I laughed then. It was a dry, humorless sound that felt like sandpaper in my throat. I reached into the passenger seat where I had tossed a manila folder, a copy of the one I had left on the dining table. I pulled out a single photograph and held it up to the crack in the window. It was grainy, taken from a distance, but unmistakable. It showed Elena and Julian on the balcony of the hotel in Chicago during her marketing conference last month. His hand was on her waist, her head was thrown back in laughter. It was intimate. It was possessive. "Chicago," I said. "The Palmer House Hilton, room 402. You ordered room service at 11:30 p.m. Oysters and champagne. I have the receipt, Elena. I have the flight logs. I know you didn't stay at the conference center." Elena stared at the photo. The fight drained out of her shoulders. She slumped against the car door, looking smaller, older. The cool girl persona, the unflappable, elegant wife I had shown off at galas, disintegrated. What was left was just a frightened woman caught in a trap of her own making. "It was a mistake," she whispered, tears finally spilling over, thick and fast. "I felt lonely, Mark. You're always working. You're always so distant. I just wanted to feel seen." "Don't," I cut her off. "Do not blame me for your decision to sleep with my mentor. I was working to pay for the remodel you wanted. I was working to fund the lifestyle that allowed you to play socialite." "I can fix this," she begged, reaching through the crack to touch my shoulder. I recoiled as if her touch were acidic. "We can go to therapy. I'll cut him off. I'll do anything. Please, Mark, don't leave me here alone." "You're not alone," I said, shifting the car into reverse. "You have the house, you have the wine, and I'm sure Julian will call back." I hit the button to roll up the window. She pulled her fingers back just in time, slapping her palms against the glass as I backed down the driveway. Her mouth was moving, screaming my name, but the soundproofing of the SUV turned it into a silent movie. I backed into the street, shifted to drive, and pressed the accelerator. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I knew if I saw her standing there, broken and barefoot in the driveway of the home we built together, I might hesitate, and hesitation was fatal. I drove for 20 minutes without music, the silence of the car suffocating. I navigated the familiar suburban streets, passing the park where we used to walk our dog, the Italian restaurant where we had our first date, the life we had curated so carefully. It all felt like a film set now, two-dimensional props with nothing behind them. I pulled into the underground parking lot of the Marriott downtown. It was impersonal, sterile, and exactly what I needed. I checked in at the front desk, the receptionist smiling politely at the man with one suitcase and no wedding ring on his finger. I had taken it off in the car and shoved it into the cup holder. Room 714. I walked in, dropped my bag on the floor, and sat on the edge of the stiff, white bed. The room smelled of industrial cleaner and stale air conditioning. I pulled out my phone. 7 missed calls from Elena, 2 from Julian. 1 text from Julian. "We need to talk. Don't do anything rash." I powered the phone off and tossed it onto the nightstand. The silence in the hotel room was heavier than the silence at dinner. This was the first night in 10 years I hadn't slept under the same roof as my wife. The autonomy felt terrifying, but as I loosened my tie and stared at the city lights flickering outside the window, I realized something else. I wasn't just angry, I was relieved. The lie was dead. The autopsy was over. Now, I just had to survive the funeral. The ceiling of the Marriott hotel room was textured with a pattern of mindless swirls, a stark white landscape that I had been staring at for 3 hours. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, the adrenaline spiked again, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My body was exhausted, but my mind was rewinding the tape, playing back the last 6 weeks in high definition. The collapse of a marriage doesn't happen in a single explosion. It happens in the silence between the words. It happens in the microscopic shifts of routine that to a trained eye signal a tectonic change. It started 42 days ago. It was a Tuesday. I had come home early from the firm, intending to surprise Elena with takeout from her favorite Thai place. I walked into the living room and found her on the sofa, her phone angled away from the light. When I announced myself, she didn't just jump. She practically threw the device under a throw pillow. "You're home early," she had said, her voice an octave too high. "I wanted to surprise you," I replied, placing the food on the counter. Later that night, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a habit of mine to check the time on it if mine was charging. I tapped the screen. Usually her passcode was 1014, our anniversary. I tapped it in. Incorrect passcode. I frowned and tried again. Incorrect passcode. She had changed it. After 8 years of sharing everything, including our digital lives, she had locked the gate. That was the first crack in the foundation. I didn't confront her. I was a forensic accountant by trade. I didn't deal in accusations, I dealt in audits. I began to audit my wife. The second clue was the gym. Elena had never been a fitness enthusiast, but suddenly she was spending 3 nights a week at a boutique spin studio downtown. She claimed the classes ran from 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. 2 weeks into my audit, I drove to the studio on a Thursday night. I parked across the street and waited. 8:30 p.m. came and went. Women streamed out in spandex, faces flushed, water bottles in hand. I watched every single one of them. Elena never exited the building. I checked our joint credit card statement the next morning. There were no charges for the spin studio. However, there were recurring charges for an Uber taken from a drop-off point 2 blocks from the gym to an address in the financial district. The address was a luxury high-rise, the Orion. My stomach had dropped. I knew that building. I knew the penthouse. The realization didn't hit me all at once. It seeped in like poison gas. The final confirmation came a week later at a company mixer. Julian was there, holding court as usual. He was my mentor, the man who had hired me fresh out of college, the man who had toasted at our wedding. He was charismatic, older, distinguished. I watched him across the room. He was wearing a new cologne, something heavy with sandalwood and leather. I greeted him, shook his hand, and we talked business. He clapped me on the shoulder, asked how Elena was doing. "She's great," I lied. "Busy with her new gym routine." "Good for her," Julian smiled. A tightness appeared at the corner of his eyes, a micro-expression of guilt or duplicity. Later that evening, when we got home, Elena tossed her coat over the banister. As I went to hang it up, the scent hit me. It wasn't her perfume. It was sandalwood and leather. It was unmistakable. It was Julian. The nausea was violent. I locked myself in the bathroom and dry heaved over the sink. It wasn't just infidelity. It was incestuous. My wife and my mentor. The 2 pillars of my life had conspired to crush me. That was the moment the grief turned into cold, hard calculation. I could have screamed. I could have dragged her out of bed and demanded the truth right then. But that would have given them the upper hand. They would have spun a narrative, minimized the damage, maybe even convinced me I was crazy. No, I needed leverage. I needed irrefutable proof. For the next month, I became an actor in my own life. I kissed her goodbye in the mornings, tasting the betrayal on her lips. I listened to her stories about her workouts, nodding and asking questions, feeding her enough rope to hang herself. Every lie she told, I cataloged. Every time she smiled at her phone, I noted the time. I hired a private investigator not to find out if she was cheating, but to document how. I needed the photos. I needed the burner phone number. I needed the leverage to ensure that when the hammer dropped, she would be flattened. The hardest part wasn't the anger. It was the moments of normalcy. Watching Netflix on a Sunday, she would laugh at a joke, and for a split second, I would forget. I would forget that she was sleeping with Julian. I would forget that she was planning a future that didn't include me. And then the memory would rush back, sharper and more painful than before. I remembered sitting in my office, looking at the divorce papers I had drafted myself before sending them to my lawyer for review. I had to itemize our life. The house, the cars, the dogs. The memories didn't have a line item, but they were the most expensive things to liquidate. Back in the hotel room, I rolled over and stared at the digital clock. 3 a.m. The architecture of their betrayal had been intricate, built on a foundation of my trust. But I had dismantled it brick by brick. I had played the fool for 6 weeks so that I wouldn't have to play the victim for the rest of my life. I closed my eyes, the image of the manila envelope sliding across the table replaying in my mind. It was done. The demolition was complete. Now, I just had to survive the dust. Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. I had spent the weekend in the sensory deprivation of the hotel room, but walking into the glass-walled lobby of our firm felt like stepping onto a stage where everyone knew their lines except me. The silence was immediate. The receptionist, a young woman named Sarah, who usually greeted me with a bright update on her weekend, suddenly found her computer screen fascinating. As I walked down the corridor toward my office, conversations ceased mid-sentence. Eyes darted away. The air was thick with the static of whispered rumors. They knew. In the age of digital connectivity, the collapse of a marriage travels faster than light. I reached my office and closed the door, leaning back against the heavy wood. My phone buzzed. It was a text from David, my college roommate and one of the few friends I assumed would be in my corner. David: "Hey man, just saw Elena's post. I didn't know things were that bad. Maybe you should cool off before doing anything permanent. Taking the cards away is a bit intense." I stared at the screen, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. Elena's post. I didn't have social media apps on my phone anymore. I had deleted them Sunday night to preserve my sanity, but I pulled up Instagram on my desktop browser. I navigated to her profile. It was public, of course. There was a photo posted 6 hours ago. It was a black and white selfie, artfully composed to show her looking disheveled, vulnerable, with a single tear track drying on her cheek. The caption was a masterpiece of vague victimization. Sometimes the person you built your world around decides to set it on fire. Blindsided. Heartbroken. Scared for the future when you're left with nothing but the clothes on your back. Please respect my privacy while I try to figure out how to survive this cruelty. It had 300 likes. The comments were a deluge of support. "Stay strong, Queen. He doesn't deserve you. Men are trash. Here for you. Let me know if you need a place to stay." I felt a surge of bile rise in my throat. She hadn't mentioned Julian. She hadn't mentioned the affair. She hadn't mentioned that the clothes on her back were designer silk and that she was currently sitting in a mortgage-free house that I paid for. She had successfully framed the narrative. I was the erratic, abusive husband who had snapped and abandoned his wife. She was the martyr. The door to my office opened without a knock. It was Julian. He looked terrible, which gave me a grim sense of satisfaction. His usual impeccable suit was rumpled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He closed the door and stood there, not advancing into the room. "We need to handle this professionally," Julian said, his voice tight. He didn't apologize. He didn't ask how I was. He went straight to damage control. "The partners are asking questions. Elena called the managing director's wife this morning, crying. She told her you froze her accounts." "I did," I said, sitting down behind my desk. It felt good to have the barrier of the oak desk between us. It's standard procedure in a contested divorce involving infidelity, preservation of assets. "You're making us look unstable, Mark," Julian hissed, stepping forward. "This is a reputation business. If you drag this out, if you make this ugly, clients will leave. We can't have a public war." I looked at the man I had once considered a father figure. I saw the fear behind his eyes. He wasn't worried about the firm. He was worried about his own exposure. If the reason for the divorce came out, that he, a senior partner, was sleeping with a junior partner's wife, his moral standing would be incinerated. "I'm not making it ugly, Julian," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I haven't posted anything. I haven't called anyone. I haven't told the managing director's wife that you prefer the Palmer House Hilton for your trysts. Yet." Julian flinched. "Elena is controlling the narrative out there," I continued, gesturing to the computer screen. "She's painting me as a monster to protect herself, and to protect you. Because if she admits to the affair, she loses the sympathy vote. So, I have to be the villain. Just give her the money," Julian said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Give her what she wants. Let's settle this quietly, for the good of the firm." "Get out of my office," I said. "Mark, get out." He left. But the damage was done. By noon, 3 of our mutual friends had blocked me. My sister called, asking why Elena was texting her about me having a mental breakdown. The isolation was swift and suffocating. I realized that the truth is a heavy, slow-moving thing, while a lie is light and aerodynamic. Elena was winning the court of public opinion because she was willing to weaponize her tears. I had the evidence, the receipts, and the moral high ground, but none of that mattered to the acquaintances scrolling through their feeds at lunch. To them, I was just another cold, corporate husband discarding his wife. I sat alone in my office as the sun went down, watching the city lights flicker on. I could have retaliated. I could have posted the photos. I could have released the text messages. It would have nuked her reputation instantly. But my lawyer's voice echoed in my head. Do not engage. Let her dig her hole. We saved the ammunition for the judge. It took every ounce of discipline I possessed to close the browser, turn off the computer, and walk out of the building. I walked past the whispering colleagues, past the judgmental stares, carrying the weight of the truth alone. I was losing the war of perception, but I had to believe that the war of facts was the only one that counted. The conference room at my attorney's office smelled of lemon polish and aggressive negotiation. It was a neutral ground, theoretically, but the air was thick with the invisible smoke of a war being fought with spreadsheets instead of bullets. Across the long glass table sat Elena. She looked different than she had the night I left. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, and she was wearing a white suit that I knew cost more than my first car. It was armor. She was dressed for the role she was currently playing on social media. The wronged woman, the innocent victim of a husband's midlife crisis. Next to her sat her attorney, a man known for being a pit bull in divorce court, whose hourly rate likely exceeded Elena's monthly income. My lawyer, a woman named Sarah who possessed a terrifying calmness, opened a thick binder. We are here to discuss temporary support and the disposition of the marital residence, Sarah said, her voice devoid of emotion. Elena's lawyer, Mr. Vance, leaned forward. My client requires exclusive use of the marital home during the proceedings. She also requires spousal support, commensurate with the standard of living established during the marriage. We are asking for $10,000 a month in temporary maintenance. I didn't flinch. I had expected this. Elena was used to a life where bills were things that simply disappeared on autopay. She had no concept of the machinery required to keep the lights on. Denied, Sarah said simply. Mr. Sterling has been the sole provider for the last 6 years. Mrs. Sterling has a degree in marketing and is capable of employment. Furthermore, regarding the house— I'm keeping the house, Elena interrupted, her voice sharp. She looked at me for the first time, her eyes hard. It's my home, Mark. You walked out. You don't get to kick me out. It's a 4-bedroom house with a $5,000 mortgage, Elena, I said quietly, plus property taxes, landscaping, and utilities. The monthly burn rate on that property is $8,000. So pay it, she snapped. You have the money. I have the money, I corrected. You do not. And since I am no longer living there, I am not paying for you to live in a mansion while I stay in a hotel. We sell the house. Or you buy me out. Elena laughed, a nervous, incredulous sound. Buy you out? With what? Exactly, I said. The reality began to set in. I watched her face as Sarah slid a spreadsheet across the table. It detailed our expenses versus her individual income, which was currently zero. Your credit cards were supplementary cards on Mark's account, Sarah explained. Those have been closed. The lease on your Range Rover is in Mark's name. He is returning the vehicle next week. You will need to secure your own transportation. Elena turned pale. You're taking my car? I'm mitigating damages, I said. I'm not paying for a car I don't drive. Just like I'm not paying for the country club membership you used to have lunch with your friends. That was canceled yesterday. Elena looked at her lawyer, panic flaring in her eyes. Can he do this? Julian said. She stopped herself, biting her lip. The name hung in the air like a foul odor. Julian said. Julian isn't a party to this lawsuit, Mrs. Sterling, Sarah said, catching the slip immediately. Unless you'd like to depose him regarding his contributions to your lifestyle. Elena went silent. I saw her hand drift to her phone, which was face down on the table. I knew what she was thinking. She was thinking that Julian would fix this. Julian, the powerful senior partner, the man who promised her excitement and passion. But I knew Julian better than she did. I knew that Julian was leveraged to the hilt with alimony from his first 2 wives. I knew that Julian loved the thrill of the forbidden, but he hated the mess of the reality. We are willing to offer a one-time bridge payment of $5,000 to help Mrs. Sterling secure an apartment, Sarah continued. The house goes on the market on Monday. No! Elena slammed her hand on the table. I am not moving into an apartment. I am not giving up my life because you decided to be vindictive. You gave up your life when you booked room 402 at the Palmer House, I said. Mr. Vance cleared his throat loudly. Let's take a recess. They left the room. Through the glass wall, I watched them in the hallway. Elena was frantically typing on her phone. She held it to her ear. She paced. She looked at the screen, then dialed again. She was calling Julian. I watched as she lowered the phone slowly, staring at it in disbelief. He hadn't answered. 10 minutes later, they returned. Elena looked shaken. The defiance was cracking. We will agree to list the house, Mr. Vance said, his tone significantly more subdued. But we insist on the Range Rover for another 30 days. 7 days, I countered, and she pays for her own gas. As we packed up the papers, Elena lingered. She waited until the lawyers had moved toward the door before speaking to me. He's not answering, she whispered, her voice trembling. Julian, he said he'd help me with the lawyer fees. Now his assistant says he's in meetings all week. I looked at her, and for a moment, the anger was replaced by a profound pity. She had traded a man who would have walked through fire for her, for a man who wouldn't even answer a phone call when things got difficult. Julian likes nice things, Elena, I said, buttoning my jacket. He likes expensive wine and expensive women, but he doesn't like the bill. You're the bill now. I have nothing, Mark, she said, tears welling up. If you sell the house, where do I go? You have a marketing degree, I said, walking past her, and you have your freedom. That's what you wanted, isn't it? To be free of me? I walked out of the conference room and into the elevator. As the doors closed, I let out a long breath. I had won the skirmish, but I didn't feel triumphant. I felt lighter, yes, but it was the lightness of a man who has just unloaded a heavy burden, only to realize he has to walk the rest of the way alone. The financial severing was painful, but it was necessary. I was buying my future back, dollar by dollar. The lease on my new apartment was for 6 months. It was a sterile, modern unit in a building downtown, furnished with the kind of beige, inoffensive furniture that suggested nobody actually lived there. It was a holding cell for people in transition. I stood in the center of the living room on a rainy Tuesday night, holding a single plate and a fork. The silence was absolute. For 10 years, my life had been a cacophony of shared domesticity. The TV humming in the background, the sound of Elena drying her hair, the click of the dog's claws on the hardwood, the idle chatter about our days. Now, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. This was the part of divorce nobody warned you about. The anger was fueling, a high-octane energy that kept you moving through meetings and court filings. But when the anger burned off, you were left with the ash, and the ash was heavy. I sat on the couch and ate my takeout in silence. I checked my phone. No missed calls, no texts. The war was quieting down into a cold war, and the solitude was crushing. I had won the battle for the assets, but I woke up every morning reaching for a woman who wasn't there. I had to relearn how to make coffee for one. I had to relearn how to fill a Sunday afternoon without a partner. It wasn't liberation yet. It felt like amputation. Across the city, however, the grass wasn't greener. It was scorching. I learned the details later through the grapevine of mutual acquaintances who were too eager to spill the gossip. But I could have scripted it myself. Elena had moved into Julian's penthouse 3 days after the house went on the market. She had packed her life into suitcases and arrived at his door, expecting the romance of their illicit hotel rendezvous to seamlessly translate into domestic bliss. She expected champagne and passion. What she got was reality. Julian was a man who valued his bachelorhood as much as his portfolio. His penthouse was a museum of his own ego, glass, chrome, and white leather. It wasn't designed for a cohabitant, especially not one bringing the chaos of a messy divorce. According to the stories, the friction started immediately. Elena, stripped of her credit cards and her car, was stuck in the apartment all day while Julian worked. When he came home, he didn't want to hear about her legal battles or her fears about the future. He wanted the fun, carefree mistress he had in Chicago. He wanted the fantasy. Instead, he got a woman who was crying on his Italian leather sofa because her social circle had ostracized her. The illusion shattered on a Friday night. They were supposed to go to a gala, a high-profile charity event where Julian was a donor. Elena had spent all day getting ready, desperate to reclaim her status, to show the world that she and Julian were a legitimate power couple, not a sordid scandal. As she walked into the living room, dressed in a gown she had likely put on a credit card she couldn't pay off, Julian shook his head. "You can't go, Elena," he told her, pouring himself a drink. "What?" she asked, freezing. "Why? We're a couple." "We are a liability," Julian corrected her coldly. "My partners are already breathing down my neck about the optics of this situation. If I walk in there with you on my arm, while Mark is sitting at home, it looks bad. It looks cheap." "I am not cheap," Elena screamed, the frustration of weeks boiling over. "I left my husband for you. I lost my house for you." "I didn't ask you to leave him," Julian said, taking a sip of his scotch. "I didn't ask you to blow up your life. You got caught, Elena. There's a difference." That was the death knell. The realization must have hit her with the force of a physical blow. To Julian, she wasn't a soulmate. She was a recreational activity that had gotten out of hand. The affair thrived in the dark, fueled by secrecy and adrenaline. Brought into the light of day, amidst laundry and legal bills and social judgment, it withered instantly. Back in my apartment, I was hitting my own bottom. I had opened a bottle of wine, the same vintage we had opened on our anniversary, intending to pour it down the sink. Instead, I drank half of it, scrolling through old photos on a cloud drive I hadn't scrubbed yet. There we were in Maui. There we were at Christmas. Smiles that looked so genuine. Had she been lying then? Or did she just change? The questions swirled in my head, a toxic loop. I felt a profound sense of failure. Not just that the marriage failed, but that I had been so blind. I felt unlovable. If the person who knew me best could discard me so easily, what was I worth? I threw the wine glass against the wall. It shattered, leaving a red stain on the beige paint that looked like a gunshot wound. I sat on the floor among the shards and wept. I cried for the wife I thought I had, not the one who existed now. I cried for the 10 years that felt like a sunken cost. But as the tears dried, leaving my face tight and my eyes stinging, I realized something. I was alone, yes. I was in pain, yes, but I was clean. I wasn't waiting for a text that would never come. I wasn't wondering where my spouse was at 10 p.m. I wasn't living in a lie. The fantasy had collapsed for both of us. Elena was trapped in a cold penthouse with a man who resented her. I was trapped in a beige apartment with my grief. But my trap had a door, and I held the key. Hers was a cage she had built herself, and the walls were closing in. I stood up, found the broom, and swept up the glass. It was time to stop looking at the stain and start painting over it. 6 months is a strange amount of time. It is long enough for the seasons to change, for the leaves to turn from green to brown, and then to be buried under snow. It is long enough for a human body to replace almost all of its cells, but it is not quite long enough to erase the phantom limb sensation of a decade-long marriage. I sat in the same conference room where we had argued over the house, but the atmosphere today was different. The air was no longer charged with electricity and rage. It was stale, heavy with the dust of finalized bureaucracy. The table was covered in stacks of paper, each flagged with little yellow "Sign Here" stickers, the roadmap of our divorce. Elena sat across from me. She looked different. The defiance that had fueled her during the early days of the separation was gone, replaced by a quiet, bruised resignation. She wasn't wearing the white power suit anymore. She wore a simple gray sweater and jeans. Her hair was pulled back, and I noticed she wasn't wearing the diamond earrings I had given her for her 30th birthday. "Just the last few pages, Mark," my lawyer Sarah said softly, pushing a document toward me. "This is the final decree." I picked up the pen. It felt heavy in my hand. This was it, the official death certificate of Mark and Elena. I signed my name, Mark Sterling. The ink flowed smoothly, black and permanent. I passed the papers across the table. Elena took the pen. Her hand hovered over the line for a moment. I watched her eyes scan the document, perhaps looking for a loophole, or maybe just remembering the day we signed our marriage license. We had been so young then, so stupidly optimistic, thinking love was a renewable resource that would never run out. She signed. "Thank you," Sarah said, gathering the files efficiently. "I'll file these with the clerk this afternoon. You will receive the certified copies in the mail within 10 days. The lawyers, sensing the weight of the moment, made their excuses to leave us alone for a minute. It was a professional courtesy, or perhaps they just wanted to avoid the awkwardness of the final goodbye. The door clicked shut, leaving us in the silence of the glass-walled room. For a long time, neither of us spoke. We just looked at the empty table between us. "Julian left me," Elena said. Her voice was quiet, factual, devoid of self-pity. I didn't look up. I know. I heard he transferred to the London office. He told me I was too much drama. She let out a dry, hollow laugh. "Can you believe that? After everything I blew up for him, I was the inconvenience." "I warned you, Elena," I said, finally meeting her gaze. "You were chasing a feeling, not a future." "I know," she whispered. She looked down at her hands, which were bare of any rings. "I'm living in a studio apartment in Queens. It's small. It's quiet. I hope you find peace there," I said. And I meant it. The blinding rage I had felt 6 months ago had metabolized into a dull, distant sadness. I didn't want her to suffer anymore. I just didn't want her to be my problem. "Do you hate me?" she asked, her eyes searching mine, looking for some spark of the man who used to adore her. I thought about the question. I thought about the night of the anniversary, the 2 phones ringing, the humiliation, the nights I spent staring at the ceiling of the Marriott. "No," I said truthfully. "Hate takes energy, Elena, and I don't have any energy left for you. I don't hate you. I mourn the time. I mourn the 10 years I spent building a life with a stranger." She flinched, as if I had slapped her. Indifference is always a sharper blade than anger. "I miss you," she said, a tear finally escaping and tracking down her nose. "I miss who we were. I miss my best friend." "You didn't miss me when you were in Chicago," I said, my voice steady. "You didn't miss me when you changed your passcode. You missed the safety, Elena. You missed the house and the stability and the man who fixed things. But you broke the one thing I couldn't fix." I stood up and buttoned my coat. The room felt too small suddenly. I needed air. I needed to see the sky. "Mark," she said, standing up too, reaching a hand out but stopping short of touching me. "Is there any chance, in the future, once we've both healed?" I looked at her hand, hovering in the space between us. It was the same hand that had held Julian's, the same hand that had thrown away our vows. "No," I said. "The ink is dry, Elena. Some bells can't be unrung." I turned and walked toward the door. I didn't look back. I didn't want my last memory of her to be her crying in a conference room. I wanted my last memory to be the signature. The clean, sharp lines of my name on the paper, reclaiming my identity. I walked out of the office building and into the bustling city street. The wind was cold, biting at my cheeks, but the sun was shining. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the exhaust-tinged air of New York. It wasn't fresh, but it was free. I checked my watch, 12 p.m. The rest of the day was mine. The rest of my life was mine. The calendar notification popped up on my phone at 8 a.m. Anniversary. I had forgotten to delete the recurring event. I stared at the screen for a moment, waiting for the familiar pang of grief or the spike of adrenaline that used to accompany any reminder of Elena. But it didn't come. There was no tightness in my chest, no nausea, just a mild, detached recognition of a date that used to mean everything and now meant nothing. It was just a Tuesday in October. I swiped left and hit delete. Then I selected delete all future events. 1 year, 365 days since the night the 2 phones rang and my world split open. I spent the day working. The firm had stabilized after Julian's departure. In fact, without his toxic mixture of ego and negligence, productivity had soared. I had been promoted to senior partner, occupying the office that used to be his. I had redecorated it completely, stripping away the dark wood and leather for something modern, open, and transparent. I didn't hide anything anymore. That evening, I didn't go to a romantic French restaurant. I didn't buy expensive wine to impress anyone. I went to a small, crowded jazz bar in the West Village that I had discovered a few months ago. It was loud, vibrant, and full of life, the exact opposite of the silent, sterile mausoleum my marriage had become in its final days. I sat at a small round table near the back. Across from me sat an empty wooden chair. A year ago, that empty space would have terrified me. It would have screamed of failure and loneliness. I would have filled it with anyone, a rebound, a distraction, just to avoid looking at the void. But tonight, I looked at the empty chair and saw something different. I saw peace. The waitress placed a bourbon on the table. "Waiting for someone?" she asked with a friendly smile. "No," I said, lifting the glass. "Just me." "Enjoy," she said, and walked away. I took a sip of the bourbon, letting the warmth spread through my chest. I thought about Elena. I had heard through the grapevine that she was working as an administrative assistant at a small real estate firm in Jersey. She was dating again, some guy she met online. I hoped he treated her well. I hoped she had learned that validation comes from within, not from the attention of men who don't respect you. But mostly, I hoped I never had to see her again. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about condoning what she did. It was about cutting the tether. It was about realizing that her choices were a reflection of her character, not my worth. I looked around the bar. I saw a young couple in the corner, holding hands, their eyes locked on each other with that terrifying, beautiful intensity of new love. I didn't feel bitter. I felt a quiet sense of protection for them. Be careful, I thought. Treasure it. Protect it, because it is fragile. Loyalty is a currency that is losing its value in a world obsessed with the next best thing. We treat relationships like upgraded phone plans, waiting for the trade-in offer. But the real value isn't in the newness. It's in the maintenance. It's in the boring Tuesdays and the difficult conversations, and the choice made every single day to not answer the other phone when it rings. Elena had answered the call. She chased the thrill and found only ruin. I answered with papers. I chose the hard path of severing the limb to save the body. And it hurt. God, it hurt. There were nights in that first month when I lay on the floor and thought I would never stand up again. But I did stand up. I walked through the fire of the legal system, the humiliation of the gossip, and the hollow ache of the empty bed. And I came out the other side. I wasn't healed in the sense that the scar was gone. The scar would always be there. But it was no longer a wound. It was a reminder of what I survived. It was a reminder of my own standard. I finished my drink and signaled for the check. I paid with my own card, earning my own money, living my own life. I walked out of the bar and into the cool autumn night. The air smelled of rain and dried leaves. I buttoned my coat and started walking toward the subway. I had no one waiting up for me, no one to report to, no one to lie to me. I was alone, and for the first time in a decade, I was free. I took a deep breath, looking up at the skyline of the city that had witnessed my fall and my rise. The night was dark, but the stars were finally visible. I kept walking.